It's my great pleasure to welcome Katrín Oddsdóttir to Aarhus and to our university and to the DEMINOVA project. Katrín is an activist. She is a human rights lawyer. She is passionate about democracy and about human rights and about whale rights and animal rights and the environment. And it is really my tremendous pleasure to welcome her here. And I thank you so much for joining us. And I turn you over to Katrín.
Hello, Danish people and others. I wanted to talk about I guess democracy, but also just about sort of the broad picture. I come from Iceland, and what I wanted to explain to you maybe are three different stories. This is my grandmother. She's in the arms of her adopted mom, or her mom who adopted her, and I wanted to explain to you a little bit about maybe her story, but also about democracy, because it's easiest to understand things from stories for us, the Homo sapiens. You know, I know that you're going to be given a lot of like academic research and statistics and all that shit while you're here, but stories is what we remember, and stories is what connects us. So I wanted to try to give you something like that. First of all, if I'm a little bit disfocused, is because I have not slept for a long time, because these girls here, you can see on the picture, this is an Iranian woman. She has chained herself to our whale boats here, currently in the harbor in Iceland, and she has had no water or food for like now 27 hours, because the police climbed up before the media came and took away her rucksack. In her rucksack, she had her water, her food, and her sleeping bag, but she's very stubborn. And she's still there. This is being live broadcasted, like if you click the link at the moment. And the big debate that we're doing, and I'm trying to fight this as a lawyer from Denmark currently, is this new scenario, which basically means if the police takes away your water while you're protesting, which is part of your freedom of expression, is the police supposed to give it back once the media, like the light has been shed on it? Because as soon as the media came over, they were really polite. They were climbing up. They're going like, would you like to come down? No, okay, then climbing down again. But before the media came, they were like, we got the footage of them depriving her of her food. And of course, you could say she's trespassing. She shouldn't be there. What the hell? Just go down if you don't want to be without water. But this is more complicated than that, like everything in life is. So I just wanted to share this with you. You can follow it. It actually has reached the global media. And it's big part of like 6 months work that I've been doing, trying to stop ridiculous whaling in Iceland. Iceland is the only nation in the world that still hunts fin whales, which is the second largest animal in this planet. And the fin whales really help the atmosphere. So it's a climate change thing. And it's really like interesting. It shows you that each and every topic, probably you will learn this also here, has so many different sides. And currently, I used to fight as a lawyer of the Nature Conservative Association, but then the Hollywood stars like Leonardo DiCaprio and Jason Momoa started boycotting Iceland because of the whaling. So now I represent a production company that's trying to get an injunction, and then I'm representing them up in the mast. So it's ridiculous, but it's nice. Okay, so these three stories that I wanted to share with you are like part of a PhD that I'm doing, and I paused it because PhD is ridiculously boring. Do not go there. But unless you hate your life, and then of course do go there. And and what I, as a lawyer, sort of just I did it. It's almost like activism, because there was a specific research project that was funded. It was called Democratic Constitutional Design, and that's what I'm going to talk about in a little while. But I sort of did it because I was like, oh, I can do a PhD and I can do my activism, and they would pay me while doing it. But then I got interested in it and I started doing it, and I ended up doing something called autoethnography. Basically, that is something that belongs to, how do you say this in English? Oh, Manfred. Danish people, do you know Manfred? No. Okay, it's basically a field where you research other people, and this is basically where you use yourself as a sort of a key to the field. So memories are really good for this, and I'm going to talk a little bit about growing up inside a political party called the Women Alliance, which was back in the 80s in Iceland. I'm going to talk about the crash and the constitutional process that happened in the wake of the crash in Iceland, and then the fight after that. So, oops. Okay. Can I not? Yes. This is my mom, and this is a little bus they rented. So back in the 80s, women in Iceland had very little equality, like most places in the world. And they decided, my mom and her friends, to do a political party that was all women. And basically, all they wanted to do was focus on sort of women rights and so on. And nobody expected much, you know, but they managed to totally change the landscape in Iceland, the political landscape. And they managed to change the agenda of all the parties. So just by coming in and being there, their whole work sort of infiltrated everything, and Iceland is considered the most equal country in the world now in regards to gender, and has been, like, I think 9 or 10 years in a row. I was dragged onto this bus, and I was really car sick. I was 6 years old. It was like a human rights issue, children's rights issue, I think. And I just they were like, they went to every little town in Iceland, like around the whole coast. Like, Iceland is this ridiculous place where you can only live around the coast, because the middle of Iceland is just like crazy glacier volcanic shit, you know. So basically there were like 20 people in some of the places, but they still went there, and they had this like megaphone on the roof of the bus, and then they would be like, "You there with the laundry, come on the meeting tonight," and they would play this like feminist song and stuff that have been like ingrained in my brain ever since. But this picture I wanted to show you, this is when, this is my mom there in the middle, also like very happy. She didn't look like that a lot at home, you know. We were like 6 siblings, and she was not, that was not the face she was wearing. But they're so happy there because, and they're laughing their ass off, because they actually won a huge win in the parliamentary election that nobody expected. So the number of women in the parliament increased a lot. This is one of their actions. This is, you see the really grumpy man there. He's not impressed, because basically what happened was that we had this like chauvinistic mayor, and he was giving like the Miss Iceland prize to some woman the night before. And he said something like, "Oh, I just wish the women of the Women Alliance were more like these women here," when he gave the prize. And the next day they showed up like this, and they were like, "Oh, Mrs. I don't know, and you know, Mrs. whatever you said." And he was fuming, you know. We have pictures of him. He later became like our prime minister. We have pictures of him just completely red in the face, like trying to hold it in. But my point with this picture is actually the sort of power of humor when fighting for social change. And if you look at it, when you look at your studies and you start, if you want to study these sort of movements, humor is a really underestimated ingredient in acquiring social change. And we really try to use it back home currently. But the data speaks, and actually what these women did had a huge effect in Iceland, and even outside of Iceland. You can see the blue thing is men and the red thing is women. And you can see when they came in, how that dramatically changed the landscape. Of course, this is part of a global thing where women try to sort of obtain equal rights, but it's definitely, you can't argue the fact that they totally swapped the states in Iceland. Some of the, it's really interesting to read their manifesto now, today, because this is like, 40 years ago. And some of the topics they were putting onto the agenda had never been heard before, like talking about domestic abuse. You know, they went to the second biggest town in Iceland, and they were saying, we have to build a shelter here for domestic abuse victims. And the people in Akureyri were saying, no, there is no domestic abuse in Akureyri. You know, that was seriously what they thought in 1983. And so, you know, the social change they had to try to obtain was enormous. You know, when you're used to something, this is what you think the world is. And always when we're inside the world, we're like, oh, this is the world, but we're always wrong. We're always wrong. And time proves us wrong. This is now cutting to another completely scenario. This is outside the Parliament of Iceland in January 2009. This is when the Icelandic economy has completely collapsed, which happened in 2008, where all our 3 banks defaulted. You know, it was of course part of the global financial crisis, but Iceland was hit hard and Iceland was hit first. So we were like the canary in the mine, if you like. So we went down and the whole world was like, okay, what the fuck will happen to Iceland? And will that indicate what happens to the rest? So the focus on Iceland was immense. And Icelandic people are very much like sitting at home and like shouting at the television. They're not like this, you know, we're not the French. We're not outside burning shit, you know. But this was a completely unprecedented scenario. And people took to the streets. First, it was just like one singer, and he decided to come every single Saturday at the same time, at the same place, and protest. And there were like 20 people, and then there were like 50 people, and then there were like thousands, and then there were like this. And here I think we were burning the Oslo Christmas tree, because Oslo always gives Reykjavik a Christmas tree, like it's an old tradition, and you know, it was there. So yes, but I mean, you look at this and you think like, okay, this is somewhere in South America or something. This is where people seriously have the guts to protest, and this is almost like a failed state or something, the way it looks. But this was Iceland day after day during that time. I was lucky, I was studying law, so I didn't have to be nowhere basically, or I could just skip class and protest. And that was what we all did for a long time. And finally our government caved in. This is my mom looking very happy, because you know, for her and for us, we were sort of the usual suspects, like standing outside the American embassy, like freezing our asses off, you know, 50 people, always the same 50 people. But then all of a sudden, like the whole nation, if you like, wakes up. And, you know, the surveys showed that 90% of the nation were along with the protesters. People were like, this is the right thing to be doing. Didn't matter who you voted for or anything. They just agreed that we had reached the point in our society where protesting was necessary. And this is why she feels nice. I mean, I saw her like dancing on the steps of the parliament towards sort of like a rhythm, because this was called the pots and pan revolution, because people took their cutlery and their kitchenware and they were banging this rhythm for the whole time, trying to get the government to leave, which they eventually had to do. And mom was like dancing to the samba thing. I was like, I never saw you dance before. What's happening here? This is the parliament building. The people, these are police people here, and they're trying to shield the building. I spoke to the guy who was like, Iceland, everybody knows everybody, right? So the guy who was in charge of the police effort is a really clever guy. What he did always when everybody had left, maybe 2 in the morning, and then they came back next morning, he washed the building, you know, secretly during the night. And that meant people felt always like they were back in square one. There was no escalation. It was very clever. So they had to start throwing the bananas and the eggs and the paint again, you know, from scratch. And the police, I sort of pity them in this scenario. They are also just like normal citizens with mortgages and shit that this economic situation was affecting. And there was a really beautiful scenario actually where one of the protests just kept going, and the police were very few, and the protest people kept moving between government buildings. So the police had to try to get there and then stop the next building and so on. And they had moved, and they were like only like some of them left, and they were not necessarily nice protesters. There were also people that just don't like the police, you know, maybe people who have problems and have been arrested and so on. And it was so late in the evening and in the night that most of the citizens had just left home to go to sleep, to go to work. And what they started doing was the police was standing like this in front of a building, and somebody started throwing stones. And then the people from the protesting group went between the police and the stone throwers like this. And the day after, everybody showed up in orange in support of the police, because we understood, like, if this happens, we're going down the violent street. And then this is not what we want. We want peaceful protests to lead to peaceful change, which basically is our right in a democracy. So this is a friend of mine. This became a really famous sign, you know, because he was like, how can we explain the way we feel? It's like, goddamn fucking fuck, maybe. And I was like, yeah, that's the way we're feeling. Helvitis fucking fuck. And that became sort of the slogan of this whole period, you know, helvitis fucking fuck. It just, you can't really capture the way you're feeling when your whole economy and your whole society just collapses overnight. You know, you don't have a vocabulary to describe that in a very civilized way. So helvitis fucking fuck just really nails it. This is a moment me and my ex-wife, they're looking like a Addams Family person. So basically, this is what we did. I did a speech, a very angry speech in the protest that was sort of at the height of the protest. And I was saying, listen, if you don't allow us to vote, we will carry you out. And that's just a historical fact. I wasn't seriously threatening them, but that was what they said and on the news and stuff. Basically, that ended up happening. They left, but we were in the meantime doing a sort of an action called the Emergency Government of Women, basically saying, what about if women just take over for maybe 5 years and just give the man a little bit of a break? Because if you look at it, all those big decisions that led to the downfall were male-led. The bankers were all male and they took too much risk. The politicians that controlled the law when they allowed the bankers to take the risk were also all male. And you know, I don't really believe in sort of making everything a gender problem, but at that point, this was sort of a thing that women were able to unite around, also because it is in a way humorous to point out the fact that this was the case. From that, we sort of move on, and we now have elections in 2009. For the first time in Iceland, we have a left-wing government. And this government was headed by a woman called Jóhanna Sigurðardóttir. And she had a dream that Iceland would get its own constitution for a long time. And all of a sudden, I don't know how much you know about constitutional law, but it has a sort of a thing in it that is a constitutional moment that you can actually, you have a society and it just sort of goes on. But then if many things change at the same time, you can have something called a constitutional moment. And then you have a big window for change. And of course, the crash in Iceland was such a moment. There was a big window for change. We inherited our constitution from you Danish people when we got independent in 1944. But we never meant for it to be our constitution. It was supposed to be, we were sort of sneaking away from you while you were occupied by the Nazis. So we were like, okay, by them. And we just like translated the Danish constitution and we used the word president instead of king. And then we just ran and you were like, whatever, you know, go. But we, all political parties in Iceland, agreed that this was just preliminary. And as soon as we were independent, we would write our own. And now, almost 8 years later, we still have that old fucked up king constitution from Denmark. I mean, you have updated yours and we have hardly updated ours. So this was a moment where we thought, okay, let's do this. Let's write our new constitution. It's a social contract. We're at a point in time where we actually can figure out what we want for Iceland and how we want to build the new Iceland and so on. So the first thing they did was they did this big national forum where 1,000 people met from like randomly selected completely from all over the country, from all over like the age gap and from, you know, from every different side. And they met for like in this big sports complex just for like one day to discuss the values that the new constitution should have. And then after that, we had an election where 25 people got elected to write the new constitution of Iceland based on, you know, these values and of course of just best practice around the world. It was very complicated, these elections, because so many people came forth. So they didn't expect like 470 people to go like, oh yeah, I would like to write the new constitution. And then you had to sit down as a voter and decide which 25 out of 470 you wanted. You know, it was a really demanding exercise for the voters. But these were the ones elected in the end. And it's a nice contrast to the typical founding fathers, which basically is this, you know. And throughout history, women don't participate in writing constitutions. That's just a really recent thing. And it's almost not happening at the moment yet. And what has happened is basically the constituent power, which is basically the nation where the power comes from, should be, you know, the people should have the power to change their constitution. That's a big pillar of democracy. But that has been skewed in democracies all over the world. And it's normally some experts who are very elite who get to change the constitution and decide how to change the constitution. And therefore, constitutions aren't updated, and therefore democracy aren't updated, and therefore democracy is failing. So what happened there is that we, these 25, I was there in a hideous dress to the party. We were like, okay, so we can do whatever we want. This is new, great. And to increase the drama, just after we got elected, the Supreme Court in Iceland deemed our elections invalid. They said, seriously, you can't, no. Because power, rejects change, and they said, well, we have no suspicion of the outcome being wrong, but the height of the booth was not perfect, and the number of the da-da-da, and if you add all this together, it's invalid. And there was a major drama, and Parliament had to decide whether to repeat the election or just appoint the same people, which Parliament did. But that meant that we had already had like sort of a hurt legitimacy when we started. So we're starting off trying to write a new constitution for a nation that's completely fucked in every way, and our legitimacy is hurt because we were, possibly not really elected. So what do? You try to become the change that you're asking for. So we decided, okay, let's try to write this constitution completely with the nation, and let's try to do it completely transparent. That's what we want for Iceland. We want it to be inclusionary, and we wanted to be transparent. So we decided to try to write the constitution through a sort of computer programming methodology. This here guy, he's a computer scientist, a really clever one. And he introduced a method that basically is a crowdsourced method. So you can actually use it when you're programming. You allow the users to test your program as you go along, and you allow them to build it with you. It doesn't mean that there isn't an editorial power. Somebody has to make a decision. But still, you allow for like feedback all the time. So we did that, and we published our draft like I think 11 times or something online. First only the chapters, of the new constitution, and then slowly the articles. And people could like comment through Facebook on each article, like I liked it better last week or something, or why don't you include animal rights, which we did, and so on. So basically, we were trying to do it with the nation. This one here in the pink is one of Mom's friends. So she brought some of the methodology from the Women Alliance. And one of the beautiful things that she brought was consensus methodology. Basically, instead of voting each other down the whole time, which we could have, we tried to figure out a way that we could all live with. So we tried to not do the typical warfare democracy that we are used to, where the majority just wins and that's it, shut up. Instead, we decided to try to figure out, like you do in a normal relationship, okay, you're unhappy and I'm unhappy. Like, could we find a way that makes us both a little bit happy? Isn't that better that one of us is really unhappy and the other was like, So that, I think, did wonders. So this is basically how we did it. And I think that this method actually led to this, which is a little bit of a miracle. And every 25 of us signed the Constitution in the end, and it's like 114 articles of legal text. And the people on that bloody council had such different political opinions, you wouldn't believe it. They were like I shared like one idea with one of the guys there who's like a radio host, like a racist radio host. It's like, we both think beer is good. That's our common sort of denominator. But nevertheless, we both signed it. And I think it's because we did this sort of the way we did it, And the new constitution is quite a beautiful text. I think it's like this, yeah. This is our IT stuff. We were like, oh, we want to crowdsource the constitution. Okay. Because he was like all alone, but he managed to do it nevertheless. He managed to like do the Facebook plugin to do the proposal stuff, so people could send us ideas and all that. But he looks worried because so he should have been. This is basically the sort of output. This was written in the middle of the summer in 2011, and in the summer, Icelandic people are like gypsies that just like go camp, and you can't really connect to them at all because we have like sunlight for 3 hours. So you better use it. But this still was the outcome. We got 3,600 comments, and we got 300 individual proposals, like proposals from people saying, oh, we want this or that, that the users and the visitors. Okay, let's go, little computer. We had like a communication guideline, which I think we ripped from the Guardian or something. And basically it was because when we decided to write this online, the way online dialogue is disgusting sometimes. You know, you see a news item, and if there's comments, it's always like, shut up, cunt, you know, like, what? You know, it's like cap lock, disgusting side of society, rear their ugly heads. So when we like pressed publish, we were like this. Oh, because we were expecting all this, you know, foul speech to come on to our stuff, because it was also a very political act, but it didn't happen. And I think the reason is that if you give people trust, they repay with being trustworthy, you know, and this applies to democracy also. You have to trust the people to be able to get the best outcome from the people. And we created our own output. So we were the media. We had a YouTube channel where we were trying to explain, also because the world got so interested in this. We were like trying to answer all the foreign media was like a huge task, you know. And the Icelandic media was, of course, camping. You know, they were not interested, but like the media, especially in the States, were like really interested. And ever since this happened, I've been traveling, explaining this for like, I've been everywhere, like in Harvard and Yale and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, everybody outside Iceland is highly interested in this. But in Iceland, we're still in a sort of a stalemate position, I will tell you. Okay, so we wrote the new constitution in 4 months. We also had this like sort of a weekly like general assembly, which was streamed, where we discussed every change that we've done, so people could sort of follow like how we made the decisions. In the end, we did have to vote on some things just to finalize how we're going to do it. But then we had sorted out all the big issues, so it didn't lead to anybody leaving the bus, if you like. So we still all stayed together as a group. And I mean, in Iceland, you can't find two people to agree upon what to have for dinner. You know, it's ridiculous. We like to argue, you know. So having 25 people saying yes to 114 articles of a constitution is a miracle. We did a lot of social media, and we tried to explain. And I would want to talk a little bit about this, because I feel one of the problems of democracy is also the fact that we're always focusing on the outcome. Like if there's an election, the media especially is most interested in like the percentages of each party, who can make a government and so on. They are never really interested in the actual value of the communication, when the whole nation or a lot of people take time off to discuss big things. And that in itself has its own intrinsic value. Conversation has a value, and we can't overlook it. And I think sometimes that's one of the big downfalls, is that you don't, like we had elections, you know, many times in Iceland in a few years, because they kept fucking up, the politicians, and they were saying, oh my God, this is so bad for democracy that we have to have elections now, only 11 months after the last elections. People will not come and they will not show up, and all this drama. But more people came and showed up because they were still warm from the last debate, you know. And I think that is what we should be having, an ongoing debate where people find the platform to talk about big issues among each other, not being politicians. Like we have houses for sports, we have houses for school, we have houses for religion, but we don't have any houses for conversation. What's that? I mean, this is the heart of democracy. It's actually communication and freedom of expression, and listening to somebody you deeply disagree with, but trying to figure out a way to listen to them anyway. That's democracy, I think. And we don't get much space for that at all. We get like, this one shouts at this one, and there's no way mom and dad will ever be happy again. And you're like, a little voter in between, like, you know. Okay, so our draft included a lot of things, you know, and this is just, I mean, you'll probably get those slides, I guess, so you can look at it. But there's a lot of sort of things that I think are the ingredients of the democracy of the future, if we want to continue democracy. It's maybe we don't, you know, and we do need to realize some things, like we do need to give nature rights. You know, we cannot continue living on this earth if we don't start looking at Mother Nature as a right holder. You know, everything is so human-centric that we keep making the same mistakes, and we keep knowing that we're going off the cliff, but we can't break, you know. So legally, it's not possible to fix this unless we do this. That's why we're fighting for the whaling shit. Sorry, I have to just see. Okay, so basically also rights to information. Basically, okay, special squad has arrived trying to force them out of the whaling boats. Okay, but anyway, all this aside, what happens next is that we're very happy with our constitution. We give it to the parliament, and we're like, bye then, you know, because we were only elected to do this thing, which is also really interesting, because normally parties are elected, and as soon as they're elected, the people have sort of the agenda of being re-elected. And that's not very good, because then you start fighting for your re-election more than you fight for the interest of the people. And you see this in the States, for example, where the parliamentarians spend like 90% of their time financing their own campaign to the future, not fighting for the people, but financing their own sustainable future inside politics. It's so ridiculous. And it's so, you know, toxic. And I think we should have more of those things that just have a single solution to find, and then they evaporate. You know, they don't have this invested interest of themselves continuing. So we had handed it to the parliament. I went back to being an attorney. I was like, oh, my job here is done, great. But then nothing happened. It was really weird. We handed it to them in like 2011. And in 2012, still nothing had happened. You know, they just had listened to a lot of experts, and all the experts were like, oh my God, do not do this, you know, because also, I mean, the power of changing a constitution has conventionally been with the elite and the experts, and they have a really hard time in letting go. Why is there a theater director writing my constitution? The lawyers will ask, you know, what the hell? And I think that's a really clever way, on the other hand, to actually represent the people that are supposed to live under the law. So in the end, the parliament decided to have a national referendum, which happened on the 12th October 2012. So they asked the people of Iceland, do you want this new constitution to be the basis for a new constitution of Iceland? And about half of the people showed up, and 67% said yes. And then you would again think, okay, fair enough, now it's going to be ratified. But no, still it has not been ratified. And it hasn't been ratified, even though, and now our new constitution is sort of getting old, you know, and it's somewhere in a drawer in the parliament. And it's such an excellent example of how systems reject change and how they can't actually change themselves. It's like, and they keep running into walls, like our politics are really screwed up, you know, and the trust that people have, the Iceland social trust is huge. I never lock my house, I never lock my car. We put our babies to sleep outside, and like, and then we just go and have a beer. We're like, you know, we trust each other 100%, and it works, you know. But when it comes to trust in politics, it's like 30% or something. We don't trust the people to govern our country, but we totally trust them to like not rob our kid or do anything to our stuff. It's really strange. So there's a mismatch. And I think it's because we're not being listened to. Because would you trust somebody that will tell you, I don't trust you, but you should trust me? You know, how? It must be a mutual relationship. Trust is like a circular relationship. And I think, so basically we have this huge dilemma. And that means that we have to keep fighting for this constitution, because in it is not only the fight for democracy, but the fight for democracy all over, you know. Because when Iceland wrote the constitution in a way like that, it provided a little ray of hope to so many other people. And a lot of other nations have built their model. Now recently Chile, a lot of the nations in the Arabian Spring, like Tunisia, Ireland. So like people are trying to use the model that we use to open up the process of democratic, like constitutional writing, but us failing to implement it is really not helping. So the time is sort of like, and now we've been fighting and fighting and fighting. And I went back to being a lawyer. I was like, oh, my job here is done. And then I was like, hang on, like 3-4 years have passed and nothing's happening. So I sort of forced myself to become some sort of weird mix of law and activism. And we've been like trying to, this is Christian IX, a Danish king. And this is outside our government building. And he's sort of like handing us the constitution like this, you know. It's never happened, by the way. It's a fraught moment in history, but it sort of shows so much how this constitution became ours. Some king from Denmark just like handed it over. It's like, there you go. And now you can run, little retards, you know. But basically, we try to use this statue as a symbol. And we say, okay, we've tried yours, now you try ours, you know. And also here we did an action where we ran towards the statue and we painted his hand blue, because we have this saying in Iceland, the blue hand, the sort of the blue is the conservative, and they sort of suffocate everything, all social change. And we were trying to demonstrate that this is part of the problem. Also there we gave him balloons that said we have a new constitution or so. And then we did like a social media campaign, basically saying that the people are the constituted power. So we were saying, okay, I'm the constituted power. No, the plumber is the constituted power. Like, it's not the king of Denmark, for sure. And then we have this thing called the Association of Women for a New Constitution. It was just a Facebook group in the beginning because there was a 100th anniversary of the Constitution or something on a newspaper, and we're all old men like this. And some woman was like, oh my God, I had enough. So she made this group, and the group grew and grew and grew. And now the group has like 18,000 women in it, which is huge because we're only like 370,000 in Iceland. And we said something like, okay, do you want to put your face on a little poster we want to make for a new constitution? And we expected maybe 10 or 15, but the port, it was like 2,000 women, and we were like, oh, how to manage? And in the end, a woman who was heavily pregnant just decided to compile them all and put them into some sort of a thing that we could publish in the newspapers. And in the end, it became it was put in the big concert hall when the Danish queen was visiting, and then the kids were doing the preamble. This is also funny. This is like, we're looking for the constitution. This means like where, and we're like, how is this so pictures? But the hilarious part is that Hvar is an island in Croatia. So like a people of Croatia was like, what the fuck? Why are Icelandic women looking all over for something under our hashtag? This also we've done this, like we've done, this was a really interesting action here. We did in 2020, basically we did a petition. We wanted to prove that we could get 10% of the voters to sign through electoral ideas, so it was very sort of confirmed signatures to prove that we, if the new constitution had taken force, we could have asked for a new referendum because their 10% can do it. And we sort of united with the artists and did a huge campaign where the stencils, like you see there, were all over Reykjavik asking for this new constitution. And the visual artist painted this up you all up there, basically next to the Ministry of Fisheries, because the reason why we don't get the new constitution is because the elite of Iceland holds on to our natural resources, and I don't want to let go. And in the new constitution, it says the people of Iceland are the owners of the natural resources, which means that they would have to pay fair amount back, which they don't. And he asked the question here on this big wall next to the car park, where is the new constitution? And this is the ministry. And this was in the middle of COVID, so nothing was being done. But the Monday after, he did it on Sunday, some people from the government were there, like, washing it away. And it was so revealing, you know, that this was the question you could not ask. You know, you can have like fuck ugly graffiti there, but if you ask where's the new constitution, we will get somebody down there immediately to wash it away. And this sparked a huge interest in our petition, so it backfired massively to the face of the politicians. And in the end, we got like 43,000 signatures instead of 25,000, which was our aim. Maybe the lessons from this is that the wisdom of the crowd is immense. I mean, we have the saying in Iceland, folk er fíbl, basically meaning people are stupid, but they're not. They just don't get the space to have a proper conversation. And if they do get the space, they can come up with really good solution, because diverse crowd is better than any expert committee. Sorry, human beings, we just got it wrong. Diverse crowds is better, yields better solutions than any expert committee. And this now, companies are realizing this, big companies, and slowly, I mean, more people are realizing this, but it sounds wrong because we've been taught the other way around, that we should give it the power to the people that know how to do stuff. But it's just simply wrong. Also, we know that system reject change. That's why they're system. I mean, all our bodies have like their eyes in the same place, the nose in the same place. This is a system. And if my lungs would decide to be on my shoulders, it would not work, you know. And this is the way the system feels when somebody says you have to change. They're like, no, I can't put my lungs on the outside. Everything will collapse, but it needs to change, you know. And slowly, we have changed. We're not like the animals we were 1,000 years ago. So systems will have to change, but people have to realize that sometimes you need a little bit of a jump. You can't always move slowly. Okay, but I wanted to also just like thinking, for example, like this is the thinker. It's like a naked man all alone on a room. It's like, what? Don't don't get good ideas like this. You know, this is bad, this is good. And you need to be having a conversation to get the best ideas you can. And there are so many ways to actually multiply the power of your brain through communications with people who have different shared experience to yourself. Yeah, and then I wanted just to tie it up to sort of talk about the girl power thing. So basically, these are the ingredients that I identified from my mom's struggle, and so again with the women struggle of the petition. It has to happen organically. You can't tell people what to do. They have to figure out what to do themselves, and then they go there, and then it becomes really beautiful. But if you're always telling, okay, you do this, you know, it isn't yours. It's the same with education. If you've been told what to study, you don't want to study it. But if you figure out what you want to study, you become really good at it because it's your own curiosity that leads the way. Also reject hierarchies. You know, they didn't have any leaders. They just had, you know, different people representing them the whole time. They rejected the left and right axis also. This is something we've been brainwashed with, is the reality, but it isn't really. Used consensus, used humor. They had no depth, so nobody owned them back. And they weren't afraid of chaos. Like their meetings were not like, okay, first we'll talk about this, then this, then this, then this, and then it'll be finished. It was like everybody talking at the same time, and then suddenly somehow they tie it all together. I think women are a little bit less afraid of chaos sometimes than guys tend to be. And also, they were not trying to get power. They were trying to get away from power in a way, to distribute it, and to find a way to get it to go where it wasn't flowing, but not having it. And I think sort of the democracy needs to have a generational cycle breakers, you know, like we do in humans. Now we're realizing, oh my God, I have all the trauma from my ancestors. Fuck this. And then you go on a mushroom trip or something and you fix yourself. But this has to happen to democracy. Democracy is really sick. You know, it has a lot of trauma in it, and it needs to be let out, and somehow it needs to be helped. And I think if you look at the women's rights movement, it is actually a revolution. I mean, women had absolutely no rights about 100 years ago, and look at us now. But it's without bloodshed, which is interesting. So we can learn a lot from the methodology. That's what I'm trying to say here. And we must be the change. We can't like get better results if we don't do better methods, you know. And then we have to help. But I just wanted to leave you also with this. It's a really nice word, because the Greeks, they have two words for time. They have chronos, chronological time, but they also have kairos. And kairos is when you can like, you know, when the all the situation in the society creates for a really big jump. It happens a lot with technology, for example, where you have like slow things happen, and then all of a sudden a revolution, the steam engine or the internet, you know, and then loads of things can happen at the same time. So kairos is something you should keep an open eye for. And this is, in the end, my favorite activist. It's the Arctic tern. It's a bird. I don't know if you have it here in Denmark, but it's a bird that travels all the way from Egypt to Iceland. It travels furthest of all animals, including whales. It's only like 60 grams, but it isn't afraid of anything. Like if you come close to the nest, even if you're driving a bulldozer, it attacks you. And it doesn't only protect its own, it also protects other species around it. And I think the way it's sort of, the attitude is really good. It's like, no, I don't care if you're bigger or stronger. I'm still gonna defend my own. And I know what's right here, you know. So that's all from me. If you have any like conversation, question or something like that, that would be great.